Picture this. It's Memorial Day weekend, 1954, at a dirt track outside Pittsburgh, and a coal miner in a beat-up '53 Ford is about to line up against professional racing teams with tens of thousands of dollars in engine modifications. His secret weapon cost him $20, was built with scrap metal in his garage on a Tuesday night, and 30 laps later, he'd beaten every single one of them by half a straightaway. And the best part? Nobody, and I mean nobody, could figure out how he did it. The 1950s racing scene. The year is 1950, and stock car racing is exploding across America. World War II is over. Young men are back home with mechanical skills they learned maintaining tanks and aircraft, and they're looking for something exciting to do on weekends. Dirt tracks are popping up everywhere. Old fairgrounds, abandoned lots, farmers' fields. If you could pack dirt flat enough to drive on, you had a racetrack. The cars were mostly pre-war models, 39 Fords, 41 Chevys, whatever you could find in a junkyard that still ran. The rules were simple: stock body, stock frame, but you could modify the engine however you wanted. This was before NASCAR got corporate and boring, before everything was standardized to death. This was pure American hot rodding at its finest. The typical modifications were predictable. Everyone was boring out cylinders, porting heads, installing multiple carburetors. The guys with money were running Offenhauser heads or even Arduin conversions if they could afford them. We're talking thousands of dollars in modifications. A fully built race motor in '50 could cost more than a brand new car. And yet, with all this horsepower on tap, everyone was hitting the same wall. Literally the same performance ceiling. Here's what was happening. These flathead V8s, the Ford V8 specifically, had terrible exhaust flow. The more power you made, the worse the problem got. At high RPM, the engine couldn't expel exhaust gases fast enough. Back pressure would build up, choking the engine, killing power right when you needed it most. It was like trying to breathe out while someone was pressing on your chest. Racers tried everything. Bigger exhaust pipes, which helped a little. Cut-out dumps that bypassed the mufflers entirely, which helped more but made deafening noise. Some guys ran no exhaust at all, just open headers pointing straight down, which was brutally loud and actually made less power because you lost all exhaust velocity. The smart money said you needed tuned headers, carefully calculated primary tube length and diameter, merge collectors, the whole deal. That stuff was expensive and required serious fabrication skills. We're talking hundreds of dollars just in materials, assuming you could even weld well enough to build them. So, that's the scene. 1950 to '53, everyone's chasing horsepower, everyone's fighting exhaust back pressure, and everyone's spending money like it's going out of style. The winners were usually the guys who could afford the best parts, the most expensive machine work, the trick racing components. It was an arms race, and the working man was losing. Enter Frank Kowalski, the coal miner. Enter Frank Kowalski, born 1922 in western Pennsylvania coal country, son of Polish immigrants. His father worked the mines, his grandfather worked the mines. Naturally, Frank worked the mines. Started underground at 16, lying about his age. By 1950, he'd been breathing coal dust and working in the dark for 14 years. He knew more about ventilation shafts, air pressure, and moving gases through confined spaces than most mechanical engineers with fancy degrees. Frank's introduction to cars came from necessity. The mine was 12 miles from his house, no bus service. So at 15, he bought a '29 Model A for $35 and taught himself to fix it because he couldn't afford a mechanic. By 1940, he could rebuild an engine blindfolded. During the war, too old to enlist by the time Pearl Harbor happened, he stayed in the mines, which were considered essential wartime industry. Coal-powered steel mills, steel-built tanks, and ships. Frank's contribution was digging black rocks out of the ground in the dark, while his younger brother got shot at in France. Post-war, Frank had a '53 Ford, 4 years old by '54, but still in decent shape. He'd bought it new, which was a big deal for a coal miner. Two-door sedan, flathead V8, 3-speed transmission, nothing special. He'd modified the engine a little. Bored cylinders 30 over, mild cam, dual carbs from a '55 Mercury junkyard find. Maybe made 130 horsepower on a good day. Not competitive by racing standards, but enough to have fun with. Frank started racing because a guy at work bet him $50 his Ford couldn't beat a '48 Oldsmobile in a straight line. Frank won, made $50, and thought, well, That was more fun than drinking at the bar on Saturday night. A few weeks later, someone mentioned a local dirt track having races. Entry fee was $5. Winner took home $50. Frank figured, why not? He got absolutely destroyed his first race. Finished dead last, 2 laps down. But here's the thing about Frank. 14 years underground teaches you problem solving. When something goes wrong in a mine, you figure it out or you die. That kind of pressure creates a particular type of practical intelligence. Frank didn't get discouraged. He got curious. The universal problem. Exhaust back pressure. After that first race, Frank started paying attention. He'd watch the fast guys, see what they were running. He noticed something interesting. The cars with the biggest, loudest exhaust weren't necessarily the fastest. Sometimes the quieter cars with smaller pipes were actually quicker. This contradicted everything everyone believed. Bigger pipes meant less restriction meant more power, right? Except the results didn't match the theory. Now, here's where Frank's mining experience became relevant. In coal mines, moving air is everything. You've got methane gas that'll explode if it concentrates, coal dust that'll choke you, bad air that'll kill you. The ventilation systems in mines are incredibly sophisticated. They don't just move air, they control pressure, create flow patterns, manage velocity. Frank had spent years watching how air moved through shafts, how pressure differentials affected flow, how sometimes smaller passages moved more volume than bigger ones if the pressure was right. He started thinking about exhaust gases like mine, ventilation. An engine is just a pump, moving gases in and out. The exhaust system is like a ventilation shaft. What if the same principles applied? The universal problem everyone faced was back pressure at high RPM. The engine would be screaming, making power, then suddenly hit a wall around 4,500 RPM where it just wouldn't rev higher. The exhaust couldn't evacuate fast enough. Pressure built up, pushing back against the pistons, killing power. This was accepted as just how things worked. What racers were trying was mostly guesswork. Install huge diameter pipes, 3 or 3.5 inches on engines that came with 2-inch pipes. This reduced restriction, theoretically, but it also reduced velocity. The exhaust gases would expand, slow down, lose energy. You traded one problem for another. The expensive solution was tuned headers. Beautiful physics, but calculating the correct tube length required knowing RPM range, engine displacement, firing order, and having serious math skills. Most guys just guessed wrong. Even the ones who got it right spent hundreds of dollars and dozens of hours. The investment was huge. Frank Kowalsski couldn't afford headers, could barely afford entry fees, but he had something more valuable than money. He had curiosity and practical knowledge. So one night in his garage, spring of 1954, he tried something nobody else had thought of. The $20 discovery. The idea came from an observation in the mine. They had a ventilation problem in one of the deeper shafts. Air wasn't moving fast enough through a particular passage. The engineer's solution was to widen the passage, make it bigger. Bigger passage, more airflow, right? Except it didn't work. The air actually moved slower after they widened it. An old-timer, guy who'd been mining since before World War I, said, "You made it too big. Air needs to move fast, not slow." They tried something crazy. They actually made the passage slightly smaller right at the beginning, then let it expand into a larger chamber. The restriction at the entrance sped up the air, giving it momentum, and that momentum carried it through the larger section. It worked perfectly. Airflow doubled. Frank watched this happen and thought, that's interesting. Back in his garage, Frank looked at his Ford's exhaust system. Stock pipes, 2-inch diameter, running from the manifolds back to a single muffler. He thought, what if I do the mine trick? What if I create a restriction, then an expansion? Here's what he did, and this is where it gets brilliant in its simplicity. Frank took some scrap metal, 1/2-inch thick plate steel. He cut 2 circles, about 3 inches in diameter. In the center of each circle, he drilled a hole, 1¼ inches on one, 1 3/8 on the other. He wanted to test different sizes. Then he cut slots in the exhaust pipe, right where it connected to the manifold. He slipped the metal plates inside the pipe, welded them in place. The exhaust now had to pass through these restrictive holes before expanding back into the full 2-inch pipe. It looked ridiculous. Everyone knew you wanted to reduce restriction, not add it. Frank was adding restriction on purpose. Total cost, $20 max. Scrap metal from the trash, 30 minutes of welding. He took it for a test drive. Up to 3,000 RPM, nothing special. At 3,500 RPM, something changed. The engine suddenly felt freer, more willing to rev. By 4,000, it was pulling harder than ever. At 4,500, where it normally hit the wall, it just kept revving. 5,500 RPM. The engine was screaming, making power all the way up. Frank couldn't believe it. He just gained 15 to 20 horsepower. From holes in metal plates, the technical genius, why it worked. Here's why it worked, and this is the genius part that everyone missed. Frank had accidentally, or maybe intuitively, created an exhaust scavenging system without building expensive headers. Those restrictive plates did several things simultaneously. First, they increased exhaust velocity. By forcing all the exhaust through a smaller hole, the gas had to speed up. Faster gas has more momentum, more energy. This high-velocity jet of exhaust would shoot out the restriction into the larger pipe, creating turbulence and a Venturi effect. The fast-moving gas would pull on the slower gas behind it, creating a vacuum, helping evacuate the cylinder. Second, the sudden expansion from the small hole to the larger pipe created pressure waves that reflected back toward the engine at specific frequencies. Depending on RPM, these pressure waves would arrive back at the exhaust valve right as it opened, creating negative pressure, vacuum, that helped pull exhaust out. It was the same principle as tuned headers, but achieved through restriction and expansion rather than carefully calculated pipe length. Third, the restriction prevented exhaust pulses from different cylinders from interfering with each other. In an open exhaust system, pulse waves from one cylinder could push back against another cylinder trying to exhaust. The restriction isolated each pulse, let it pass through one at a time, prevented interference. It was like a one-way valve for pressure waves. The physics are actually complicated, involving gas dynamics, pressure wave propagation, harmonic frequencies. But Frank didn't need to understand the physics. He just needed to understand flow, pressure, and velocity. Things he'd learned from mine ventilation. He'd translated practical knowledge from one field into breakthrough innovation in another. What's hilarious is that this same principle, exhaust restriction for improved scavenging, wouldn't be discovered by engineers for another decade. In the 1960s, racing teams started experimenting with stepped headers where the pipe diameter changed along its length. In the 70s, the anti-reversion cone became common, a restriction right at the header flange that prevented pressure waves from pushing back into the cylinder. In the 80s, collector extensions and merged collectors became standard. All of these techniques did basically what Frank's $20 plates did. They used restriction and expansion to manage pressure waves and improve scavenging. Frank had invented modern exhaust tuning in his garage in 1954 using scrap metal and mining knowledge. And he had no idea he'd done anything special. He just thought, it works better this way. Cool. First race, Memorial Day 1954. Memorial Day weekend, 1954. The track was outside Pittsburgh, a half-mile dirt oval that locals called Thunder Valley because of how the engines echoed off the surrounding hills. Maybe 40 cars showed up, everything from 36 Fords to brand new 54 Chevys. Winner took home $200, enough money to make it serious. Frank rolled in with his 53 Ford, still looking stock except for the numbers painted on the doors and the loud exhaust note. Other racers dismissed him immediately. One guy said, "What's a coal miner doing here? Shouldn't you be underground?" Frank just smiled. He'd heard it before. During practice laps, people started noticing Frank's car sounded different. Not louder, just different. Angrier somehow. And he was keeping up with cars that had way more money in them. One racer, guy named Tommy Novak, who ran a machine shop and had a fully built 48 Mercury with Offenhauser heads, walked over to Frank in the pits. "What, you running in that thing? Sounds weird." Frank shrugged. "Stock engine, basically. Little boring, mild cam." Tommy looked skeptical. "Bull, you're keeping up with my Mercury and I've got $3,000 in the motor. What's your secret?" Frank considered for a moment. "I made the exhaust smaller." Tommy laughed. Actually laughed out loud. "Made it smaller? That's the dumbest thing I ever heard. Everyone knows you want bigger pipes for more power." Frank just smiled. "Well, mine are smaller and I'm faster than I was, so..." The race itself was 30 laps, last man standing format. Frank started mid-pack, 15th position. First few laps were chaos. everyone jockeying for position, throwing dirt. By lap 10, the field had stretched out. Tommy's Mercury was leading, Frank was running 8th or 9th, gaining gradually. Lap 15, Frank made his move. The straight was where his exhaust modification shined. While other cars would hit their RPM wall and have to shift, Frank's engine just kept pulling. He picked off 3 cars in 2 laps, moved into 5th. Lap 20, Frank caught the top 3. Tommy's Mercury, a 54 Chevy, and a 41 Willys coupe that was stupidly fast. Frank was 4th, closing fast. Lap 25, 5 to go. Frank passed the Chevy on the outside of turn 3. A move that shouldn't have been possible, but he had enough power to make it stick. 2 laps later, Tommy's Mercury developed problems and started falling back. Frank moved into 2nd. Final 2 laps, Frank versus the Willys. Frank timed his move perfectly. Coming out of turn 4 on the last lap, he stayed in 2nd gear, let his engine rev to 5,500, right through where other engines would be choking and dying. His Ford slingshot forward, pulled alongside the Willys, edged ahead, crossed the finish line half a car length in front. The crowd went insane. The pit area went silent. Nobody could believe what they'd just seen. Tommy Novak walked over, stunned. Okay, what's the real story? Frank popped his hood. Stock engine, stock heads, dual carbs. Tommy looked underneath, saw the welded plates. What the hell is that? Frank explained. Exhaust restriction, increases velocity, creates scavenging. Tommy looked at him like he'd grown a second head. That makes no sense. That violates every rule of engine building. Frank shrugged. Maybe the rules are wrong. Word spreads. Everyone wants the secret. Word spread fast. By the next weekend, half the racers at Thunder Valley had tried to copy Frank's modification. Most of them failed spectacularly. They'd cut holes too big, too small, in the wrong location, used the wrong thickness metal. Their cars ran worse, not better. A few guys figured it out, got it close, and their performance improved. But nobody was quite as fast as Frank. Here's what everyone missed. The modification wasn't just about adding restriction. It was about where you added it, how much restriction, the ratio of restriction to expansion, the distance from the manifold. Frank had tuned all this by feel and experience, without knowing he was tuning anything. Everyone else was just guessing, copying blindly without understanding the principles. One guy installed plates with holes too small. His engine couldn't breathe at all, lost power everywhere, overheated in 3 laps. Another guy put the restriction too far back in the exhaust, past where the pressure waves would help. No improvement, just noise and heat. A third guy used thin metal that vibrated and cracked from thermal stress. His exhaust system literally fell apart mid-race. The racers who succeeded were the ones who asked Frank for details and actually listened. He was surprisingly willing to share. Frank wasn't trying to build a business or hoard secrets. He was just a miner who liked going fast and didn't see why everyone couldn't go faster together. He'd tell anyone who asked exactly what he did, show them the plates, explain the theory as he understood it. But even with Frank's help, most guys couldn't replicate it perfectly. The difference between success and failure was maybe 1/8 of an inch in hole diameter, maybe 1 inch in plate position. Tiny details that Frank had optimized through trial and error, things he couldn't quite articulate because he'd done them by feel. The establishment fights back. NASCAR officials at the time were primitive compared to modern inspections. They checked for safety equipment and obvious cheating like oversized engines or illegal fuel, but exhaust modifications were in a gray area. As long as you had mufflers, as long as the exhaust exited behind the driver, you were legal. Frank's plates were internal to the pipes, invisible unless you cut them open. Officials looked at his car, heard the exhaust, checked the engine, and found nothing illegal. One tech inspector, older guy who'd been around racing for years, pulled Frank aside. "I don't know what you're doing, and I don't care. Nothing says you can't modify your exhaust. But you're embarrassing guys with 10 times your budget, and they're gonna complain. Just keep winning and keep it clean." Frank kept winning. Summer of 1954, he won 11 out of 16 races at Thunder Valley. He started getting invitations to other tracks, bigger races, more money. A track in Ohio offered him $50 just to show up because he was drawing crowds. People wanted to see the mystery miner who was beating everyone with a stock car. The corporate racing teams, the ones backed by dealerships or parts manufacturers, were furious. Here's a nobody with a junkyard motor making them look foolish. They complained to race organizers, claimed Frank must be cheating, demanded teardowns. Every time they inspected his car, they found nothing illegal. This made them angrier. One team owner, guy who ran a Chevrolet dealership and had 3 full-time mechanics building his race cars, cornered Frank after a race. "Whatever you're doing, sell it to me. I'll pay $500 for the rights to your modification." Frank laughed. "Can't sell you something that's just physics. Anyone can do it. I'll show you how for free if you want." The team owner was baffled. In his world, innovations were proprietary, trade secrets, competitive advantages to be protected. Frank was offering to give it away. The team owner walked away, convinced Frank was lying, that there must be some secret component he wasn't revealing: the winning streak. The racing establishment in the 1950s was heavily influenced by Detroit engineering culture. Engineers with degrees from Michigan or Purdue, guys who'd worked at Ford or GM, they dominated the thinking. And their thinking said, more displacement equals more power, bigger exhaust equals better flow, money equals performance. Frank contradicted all of it. He'd made power with restriction, achieved performance with scrap metal, embarrassed corporate budgets with garage innovation. Detroit types couldn't accept this. It violated their understanding of how engines worked. So they dismissed it. They said Frank was lying about his engine specs, or using illegal fuel, or the other racers weren't trying. Anything to avoid admitting that their expensive, engineered approach had been beaten by practical knowledge and $20. The irony is that Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, they all employed exhaust engineers. These companies had entire departments dedicated to exhaust system design, and not one of them had thought of what Frank did. Or if they had, they dismissed it because it contradicted theory. Corporate engineering in the 50s was heavily theoretical, based on calculations and assumptions. Frank's approach was empirical, based on observation and testing. Sometimes empirical wins. Frank's winning streak continued through 54 and into 55. By 56, more racers had figured out the exhaust trick. Competition got tighter, but Frank was still winning regularly. He'd become a regional legend. Articles in local papers: coal miner dominates local racing scene. Kids would hang around his car asking for autographs. It was surreal for a guy who still spent 40 hours a week underground. The money from racing was good. Frank wasn't getting rich, but he was making more on weekends than he made all week in the mine. For the first time in his life, he had financial breathing room. He bought a house, a real house, with a yard and a garage, moved his family out of company housing. Racing had changed his life. The technique spread beyond just local racing. Guys who'd seen Frank race would go back to their hometowns and tell others. There's this coal miner in Pennsylvania who does something weird with his exhaust, and it makes the car way faster. The story got exaggerated in the telling, became almost mythical. By 57, racers in California were trying exhaust restrictions, having varying degrees of success. Nobody called it Kowalski's trick or anything official. It was just that exhaust thing, or the restriction mod. Frank never tried to claim credit or patent it. The idea of patenting something so simple never occurred to him. And even if it had, patents cost money he didn't want to spend. He was just happy going fast. Why Detroit ignored it? Here's the tragedy. Detroit did eventually figure it out, but they didn't credit Frank. In the 1960s, when factory racing programs were huge and companies were pouring millions into performance development, Ford's exhaust engineers discovered that stepped headers and anti-reversion technology improved power. They patented various implementations, wrote technical papers, took full credit for the innovations. Nobody mentioned that a coal miner in Pennsylvania had done the same thing a decade earlier, with scrap metal and intuition. Why would they? Corporate engineering culture doesn't acknowledge inspiration from amateurs. And Frank wasn't publishing papers or attending conferences. He was just winning races and going back to work on Monday. By the 1970s, you could buy exhaust components based on Frank's principles from any performance catalog. Collector extensions, anti-reversion cones, step tubes, all doing variations of what his plates did. Companies made millions selling these parts. Frank made nothing except the satisfaction of knowing he'd figured it out first. The bigger question is why Detroit ignored it for so long. Frank was winning races publicly, demonstrating the technique's effectiveness every weekend. Racing magazines covered his victories. Anyone paying attention could have investigated, figured out what he was doing, commercialized it, but they didn't. Why? corporate blindness, engineering hubris, the assumption that real innovation only happens in properly funded R&D departments with credentialed engineers. The idea that a coal miner could outsmart trained professionals was simply too threatening to the established hierarchy. So they ignored the evidence, dismissed the results, and missed the opportunity. It's the same story we see over and over in automotive history. The free piston engine ignored because it didn't fit conventional thinking. The Ardun heads dismissed because they came from an outsider. The Beatles' success attributed to marketing rather than engineering. Innovation from unexpected sources makes establishments uncomfortable, the end of an era. Frank stopped racing in 1959, not because he stopped winning, but because mining had broken his body. 23 years underground, breathing coal dust, working in uncomfortable positions. His back was shot, his lungs were damaged. He was only 37 but felt 60. The choice was keep racing and risk permanent disability, or quit while he could still walk. He chose to quit. His '53 Ford got sold to another racer who continued campaigning it successfully for a few more years. The exhaust plates stayed installed, doing their job, helping some other driver win races. Frank bought a small garage, started fixing cars for regular people, never went back to the track. The technique lived on, though. By the 1960s, most serious racers were using some form of exhaust restriction and tuning. The specific implementation varied, but the principle was universal. Control velocity, manage pressure waves, use restriction strategically. Frank's insight had become conventional wisdom, even if nobody remembered where it came from. Modern exhaust systems still use these principles. Anti-reversion plates and high-performance headers do exactly what Frank's scrap metal plates did. The engineering is more sophisticated now, calculated with computer simulations, optimized for specific RPM ranges. But the core idea, using restriction to improve flow, that's still Frank's innovation. In 2008, a performance exhaust company started selling something they called the scavenger plate system. It was marketed as revolutionary new technology, backed by computer modeling and flow bench testing. Price tag, $350 for a set. A few old-timers who remembered Frank's racing days wrote letters to automotive magazines pointing out that a coal miner had done the same thing 54 years earlier with $20 in scrap metal. The letters were ignored. Frank Kowalsski died in 1993 at 71. His obituary in the local paper mentioned he'd been a coal miner and a mechanic. It didn't mention the racing, the innovation, the years of dominance. His children knew Dad had raced when they were kids, but they didn't really understand what he'd accomplished. The exhaust modification, the $20 hack that had changed racing, was forgotten except by a handful of old-timers who'd been there. The legacy and philosophy. This is the tragedy of working-class innovation. Frank never got the credit he deserved because he didn't fit the narrative of how innovation is supposed to happen. Innovation is supposed to come from universities, corporate labs, credentialed experts, not from coal miners with 8th grade educations working in garages at night. So Frank's contribution got memory hold, written out of history, attributed to others. But here's what Frank would tell you if he were still around. He wouldn't care about the credit. He'd just smile and say he was glad it worked, glad other people could go faster, glad he figured it out. Frank wasn't innovating for recognition or money. He was just trying to go fast on a limited budget, using the knowledge he had from an unrelated field, solving problems the way miners solve problems, practically, simply, effectively. The lesson here isn't just about exhaust systems, it's about how we think about innovation. We assume complex problems require complex solutions, that expensive solutions must be better than cheap ones, that credentialed experts know more than practical experience. Frank's story contradicts all of that. Sometimes the best solution costs $20 and comes from someone nobody's heard of. The miner who outsmarted racers wasn't smarter than the engineers. He just knew different things, saw the problem from a different angle, wasn't constrained by conventional thinking. His solution worked not because it was sophisticated, but because it was correct. Sometimes correct is simple. Sometimes simple is revolutionary. Think about how many other innovations are out there, forgotten because they came from the wrong people. How many garage tinkerers, weekend mechanics, working-class problem solvers have figured out things that never got documented, never got commercialized, never got remembered? Frank's story survived because he won races publicly. How many others weren't so lucky? If you're working on your car right now, trying to figure out a problem, Remember, Frank, you don't need expensive parts or engineering degrees. You need curiosity, willingness to try things that don't make sense, and the courage to ignore people who tell you it can't be done. Frank's $20 exhaust hack beat corporate racing teams because he wasn't afraid to be wrong, wasn't invested in conventional wisdom, just wanted to go faster. So, here's to Frank Kowalsski, coal miner, mechanic, innovator, forgotten genius, the man who proved that sometimes the best engineering comes from the most unexpected places, that practical knowledge beats theoretical assumptions, and that $20 in scrap metal can change racing forever, even if nobody remembers your name. What forgotten innovation is sitting in your garage right now, waiting to be discovered?